Hey, good evening, everybody. Jeff here with Defensive Shooting Skills. Have a special treat tonight. We have Tom Raymond with us today. Tom's a law enforcement officer. He's actually a sheriff's deputy. I've met Tom probably, 5 years ago?
At least, probably.
Yeah, it's been 5. We've been doing the classes. It'll be 6 years this June. So, yeah, going on 6 years. Tom used to come do the legal portion for us for our CPL classes. Great guy, a lot of knowledge. He's also an instructor himself with USCCA and MCRGO.
Yes.
So he knows what it's like on my side of the fence also. So with that, Ben, this is Tom Raymond. Tom, tell us a little about yourself.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me tonight. So as Jeff mentioned, a little over 30 years in law enforcement. I do work locally here in the Kent County area for a sheriff's office. And as a disclaimer, of course, any of the things that I talk about today are my opinions and not any message from the office of the sheriff at this point.
Awesome. Good deal. So how long have you been in law enforcement?
It's almost 32 years now.
Awesome.
So,
now, what do you do with the sheriff's department?
I supervise the training unit. So we coordinate training for about 600 people, everything from first aid to firearms.
Awesome. Good deal. So with Tom, let's talk about a few things here. What is the general perception that law enforcement tends to have for concealed carry?
I think that's been kind of an evolutionary thing. When, about 20 years now, when the CPL laws changed in Michigan, it was new to law enforcement, and their perspective was a lot of unknowns. And I know there was some predictions that, they would have some contact with police that would be unsafe, with the CPL holders and things like that. And I think that's just been a great evolution where law enforcement is much more comfortable now than they were when this first started. You hear stories about, police officers on traffic stops involving CPL holders that are carrying, and the officers would hold the gun during the traffic stop, and I don't hear those stories anymore. So I think it just shows that there's a reciprocal trust that may be going on between law enforcement and the CPL holders now. That's probably better than when it started. So
yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've heard and what we teach a lot of times is with holding your firearm, a lot of time would be the person of the CPL holder's attitude when being pulled over. If you have somebody that's being very aggressive or something like that, I kind of tell my students that might be more of a reason for them to want to hold your firearm during that stop. So just be cool. I mean, sure, it's a stop. Yeah. It's a traffic stop. It's just get done with it and be on with your life.
And that's very possible. I mean, the officers may have justification for that. Hopefully, someone's personal opinion doesn't strike the reason for holding that gun. It's a matter of a fact of law and procedure that allows them to do that. And it is. I mean, we don't know who we stop until we have that initial contact and can kind of triage where that person's friend or foe and kind of go from there. So
sure. Actually, we've also been told that if they want to hold your firearm, that we should not actually per se give them their firearm, but have them remove it from us. That way, I mean, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable putting my hand anywhere near my firearm.
I mean, obviously it's about perspective, and
sure.
When movements occur, who knows what the purpose of the movements might be. And, I think it's just best that hopefully good communication is in place. And if the officers are asking something lawfully within, on that process, that you do your best to comply. I know just for the safety of everyone. So there's no misperceptions of what movement might, mean to one person or the other in that situation.
Sure. Absolutely. So, question that with everything that's been going on with law enforcement and the public here lately over the last couple of years, it seems like, what is the perception on should we as civilians per se get involved if we think that law enforcement needs help?
Yeah, and that's a very tough question because each situation could be completely different with a completely different answer. There's been cases, I think there was one down in Benton Harbor where a state trooper was in a fight, probably for his life on the side of the road, and some bystanders had stopped and interrupted.
I remember that.
Interrupted the actions of the offender in that. So in cases like that, I think that's, very welcomed. But again, the officers are going through a very, serious thing. And sometimes with tunnel vision and auditory exclusion, they don't know that you're there to help, and they may perceive you as a threat as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There could be some misrepresentation of what your intentions are, or misperception, I guess, of what your intentions are. So it's just real important, obviously, to keep that in the back of your mind that you're there to help, but the officer may not perceive you as help and may be worried about what you might be doing to help the offender in that situation.
Absolutely. I mean, fight or flight, we don't know what our body or how it's going to react. So, that's why we need to train and continue to train for their people with CPL licenses and things like that nature, especially in law enforcement. That's why you guys train. But still, human nature, we don't know how we're going to react when we're put in a life-threatening situation.
Sure, absolutely. And I guess I've had one piece of advice on that is if you can make some kind of, eye contact and verbal contact with the officer, explain them that you'd like to help, and then go based on their reaction if they're asking for your help. That may clarify some of that for them.
Good deal. Good deal. Now, what should we do when we're pulled over? Kind of some do's and don'ts. How, from the beginning to end, what would the actions be? What would you want the person in the car to do?
Sure. In a perfect scenario, if it's dark out, putting some of the windows down so the visual, ability of the officer to see inside the car is enhanced, turning on the dome light so there's no darkness, keeping your hands obviously in field of view for the officer. That's when we train officers, we tell them to look for the hands because that's what's potentially could harm the officers on those traffic stops. So those little things like that just kind of ease the tensions, on that initial approach. And then obviously if you are carrying, to disclose that, as quickly as possible, which complies with the law for CPL laws.
Now, when it comes to hands on the wheel, we've been told multiple ways. I've been told people should stick their hands out the windows so they can see empty hands. I've been told grip the steering wheel. I've also been told what I teach my students is not to grip the steering wheel, to take your hands and just put your wrist on the steering wheel with your hands straight up like this.
Yeah, and I think all of that, I think has value to it. Seeing the hands in plain view really helps to ease the officer's tension of where those hands are and what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And it could be semantics, whether the hands are open or closed, but definitely, yeah, the more they can see that your hands are not, occupied with some type of tool that can harm them, I think that will help the situation.
Now, if we're talking to law enforcement, they come up and we know that we need to notify them immediately that we're carrying a firearm. If we have to, should we politely interrupt and say, "Hey, no, don't mean to interrupt, but I just need to let you know that I'm a concealed carry holder"? Or
I think that's a valid point. I mean, obviously, I would start with I'm a CPL licensed carrier, and I am carrying a firearm today. They're probably hopefully going to ask where it is so that everybody can be on the same page of where that firearm's located. They, in fact, might ask you to don't reach for that side of your body or into that center console or something like that, just to make sure that any movement to the area where the weapon's located is not misinterpreted.
So would it be good advice to ask, what do you want me to do?
Absolutely. I mean, if it's not clear what you think the expectations of the officer are, I would absolutely ask. So that way you get that communication going and make sure that you're doing something that they understand is going to happen and there's no misrepresentation of that.
Okay, fantastic. Now, with that, also we know that people who are also in the vehicle that are CPL holders need to notify immediately also.
Yeah, it's not just the driver. Obviously, if someone's lawfully carrying their CPL gun and they are contacted by the police, it's just best to disclose that as quickly as possible so everyone knows what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can share this or not, but I got my scanner here and I was sitting here listening to Kent County and Michigan State Police. There was a gentleman pulled over, and it actually let him know when they were running him. It let them know that he was a concealed carry holder, and it actually told them how many handguns that he had registered in his name in the state.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's different inquiries that law enforcement officers can run after having a contact with an individual. I know at one point, your Michigan registration plate, if you were a CPL holder, it would flag that immediately once the license plate was run for the registered owner. That since changed. There's an additional entry that the officers have to make in order to obtain that information.
Why did they change that? Any reason?
I believe there was just some privacy issues that wanted to be addressed in that. And, for the most part, I don't really think it changed much for law enforcement. Initially when CPL changed and everyone got trained and licensed, I think, some of the smartest and trained people were the ones that were carrying guns because they went through the proper process of obtaining the license to do so. So the element of, someone flagged, their license plate flagged as a CPL licensed person, I don't think there was ever a correlation to those people being bad people or dangerous people because we just didn't see, any of the violence that, some people may have projected.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine that he got pulled over multiple times, and he wasn't carrying because of his job. He wasn't allowed to carry to the job or have it actually on the job site, so he didn't do it. And he would get pulled over, and he was constantly getting tickets. And I said, "Are you letting them know that you're a CPL holder even if you're not carrying?" He said, "No, I'm not." And I said, "Well, maybe you might want to try that."
Yeah, it could have an impact, sure.
And he got pulled over a couple other times, and he ended up getting a warning. And they said they appreciated them letting them know, even though he wasn't carrying.
Yeah, because individuals, obviously, when they're going through the CPL license process, there's criminal history checks and things like that. And they have to be validated before they get their license. So there's a vetting, if you will.
So I try to tell everybody, best thing is just be nice, be respectful.
Absolutely.
Respectful. If you're respectful, if you're respectful, respect should come back to you. Should
Yeah,
go both
hopefully,
ways.
absolutely, hopefully that's the case.
Absolutely, that's what it should be. Now let's talk a little bit about if you're involved in a shooting and you've called the police and the police arrive, what can you expect as a CPL holder? What can we expect to happen when the police arrive?
Yeah, obviously it's a very volatile situation. And I think it goes back to that where we kind of started this about as far as, perceptions and perspectives. Law enforcement officers getting information through a dispatcher, and sometimes that information can be misperceived or miscommunicated. So they know someone's involved with a gun. Sometimes descriptions go out by bystanders that actually describe the victim, if you will, that defended themselves as the offender. And that can create a lot of misrepresentation of the facts. And law enforcement don't know that until they get on scene and sort things out. So the expectation that you can be treated like a criminal in some ways and be ordered to the ground and, put your weapon down, things like that, I think is a very much a reality until things are, stable on scene and they can start to sort out some of the facts.
Yeah, so we shouldn't expect to have somebody come up and give us a high five or something.
No, not at all, because they really don't know who's who, obviously. And,
Sure.
and I just tell in my classes that I teach, it's just real important that if the officer's asking you to do something, just do your best to comply until they can, kind of sort things out.
Yeah, one of the things like I teach in my classes, I teach that, it's not law enforcement's job to determine whether you're innocent or guilty. It's their job to secure the scene,
Absolutely.
gather the evidence, and then turn it over to the prosecutor or powers above for them to determine.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
So I tell people you may expect to be sitting in jail for a couple of days. So you can
and just to kind of further the in-depth on this conversation, as far as on the scene, you could be handcuffed, you could be placed in the backseat of a police car, you may be read your criminal or Miranda rights and asked, interrogating questions and things like that. And that's just part of the process of trying to gather the facts. Now, how an individual in that situation chooses to interact with the police as far as giving statements, that's an individual choice.
Sure.
I will say that, as I tell my students, it's very emotional. And sometimes we say things in our emotional brain and not our logical brain that we don't necessarily intend to say. So we have to be very cautious with that. There's things like a public safety statement that we talk about with our law enforcement officers that are involved in shootings, because they have constitutional rights too.
Sure,
as police
absolutely.
officers, and there's emotions involved in their use of force as well. And, public safety statements that would be probably acceptable would be if someone needed medical attention that the officers didn't know about, hey, someone over there needs medical attention, or if there was a dangerous weapon that was left out for someone to find, you might want to check that part of the location because there might be a weapon over there, kind of thing. Just the scene safety kind of things. It's not really, an incrimination statement or any statement of the reasons why you might have used deadly force to protect yourself, but it keeps the scene safe. And that's kind of where I tell my students, things should probably stop at that point, because there's a lot you're processing both biologically and mentally. And again, saying things that we don't intend to say could come out wrong.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, that's what we teach in our classes, that basically keep your mouth shut until you have your attorney present or speak with your attorney, other than giving statements of whether this person tried to kill me or attack me, they went this direction.
Sure.
Here's any witnesses, any evidence. Again, if somebody needs medical attention. And at that point, pretty much keep your mouth shut. Because there again, you just went through something that was very traumatic. Even with law enforcement, they're involved. I mean, they're humans. It's a very traumatic situation. Taking another person's life or having to do that is not, to me, not something that's in our normal psyche that we should want to do.
Sure.
So, you're liable to say things that weren't correct, or the order of events may change. And, it's a recorded statement. And you guys have your Miranda. You have to, document all that stuff. So,
Right, absolutely.
But main thing is just, again, be polite, be courteous to your church, explain what's going on. Explain that, again, this person tried to attack me, things of that nature. But the biggest thing is we need to let people know it's not going to be a cakewalk. It's not going to be rainbows and unicorns. It's going to be just the dealing with the aftermath of a shooting is going to be stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the most important objective is to avoid the confrontation completely.
Absolutely.
If you can take a different path or, back away or become a good witness and call 911, that's the absolute first priority. And when the situation doesn't allow you to do that safely and you have to defend yourself, I think that's, as a last resort, was when we employed, defensive shooting or something like that. And if you can avoid the situation, that's the best goal, because even if you, are found lawfully, utilizing deadly force, there's still you have to process that personally on a lot of different levels.
Oh yeah, it's
emotionally. There's some biblical things in there that have to be sorted out for certain folks.
sure. Life. I tell people, life is it's gone. It's not going to be the same. You got financial, legal, and mental and emotional ramifications. So it's going to be a stressful thing. So it's not something that's going to be a cakewalk. So, okay, let's talk about constitutional carry. What's your thoughts on constitutional carry?
Well, is we talking about open carry at this point?
Well, I'm talking about no concealed carry where you don't have the CPL license.
Okay, all right, very good. Yeah, obviously, this government was founded on the majority opinions of the public, and that's how we established, our Constitution and different laws throughout the time. So I think whatever the reflection of the public is in regards to that is important that we honor that process of government. And if the voters choose that as the most important thing, at the ballot, then absolutely, then that should be honored. As far as it changing, I always say you're going to choose to carry a gun, you choose to take on some new responsibilities. And so if we see, situations where people are carrying guns that are not responsible, tragedy is going to occur, unfortunately. And hopefully training, prevails and people do take the time to train and get themselves properly prepared and raise that level of responsibility to safely carry. And, going back to, like I mentioned, the open carry thing, and that was the same thing with law enforcement. When we started to see more of that, expression here in Michigan, it was something new to law enforcement. It was something we were used to. So we processed those things, until we got educated and learned, the constitutional privileges and things like that with open carry.
Yeah, as an instructor, I'm kind of torn on that. I have a lot of people say, well, as an instructor, you're probably not for constitutional carry. Actually, I am. Every state that's had constitutional carry, CPL classes took a dip for a little while, but your beginner classes kind of picked up. And then after about 6 months, the CPL classes climbed again because people then want to carry outside the state when they travel. But the other side of me is like, I mean, the constitutional side of it and everything there, I'm for it. The part that scares me is we have such a rush on guns over the last couple of years. I mean, records being set on new gun owners, and we have a lot of new gunners taking a lot of new gun owners taking our classes. And there's people out there that, with constitutional carry, what scares me is the biggest part is them carrying guns and having no training whatsoever.
Absolutely.
Not even knowing the laws of what they should and shouldn't do.
And you can equate it to driving a car.
Absolutely.
Imagine if everybody got a car without a license, how we would,
oh my goodness,
the problems we might have. So
absolutely. But like I said, the constitutional side of me, with our Constitution and our rights is for it, but I'm just like, it's still can be scary.
Sure.
In the realm of people out there that carrying guns. I'm not going to lie. I've seen people that pass my class and I'm going, wow. So, yeah. You deal with a lot of different people out there. So, but hey, it's our right to protect ourselves. And I think it's a God-given right, which I think we should be respectful of. Biggest thing, like we said there, biggest thing we need to is do everything we can to avoid the confrontation.
Sure, absolutely.
Because think about it, nobody ever truly ever wins that confrontation.
No.
So, what are some general things that people need to know when dealing with law enforcement?
Well, every situation's different. And like I said, kind of goes back to that perspective component. When law enforcement are having contact with you, whether you initiated or they initiated it, we don't know each other typically. And until we can kind of figure out how this contact's going to go, there's a lot of unknowns. And some officers, we've seen essentially a change in the seniority levels of law enforcement officers. Now we're hiring them younger, and us guys with the gray hair are starting to leave the profession. So that's going to change things on how business is done, and it takes some time to learn your job, obviously, as a police officer, and that changes how you contact people. So in general, like you said, just be professional, be polite, be courteous, and then hopefully you get the same back from the law enforcement officer.
When you're talking about the changing and things like that, I can relate to that because I used to do bail enforcement from Kansas City originally, and did bail enforcement there for several years, and was a bail bondsman actually for a while. And I got to know a lot of Kansas City PD, a lot of the people out on the road patrol and things like that. And we were watching on A&E just the other night, and they had a Kansas City with SWAT team. And here's people that I knew that were rookies and just been on the force for just a short period of time, that were out on patrol, and now they're sergeants and captains and over this and over
Sure,
that. And, you know,
sure.
you're talking about, you know, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And some of the people that I knew then are now retired even.
Absolutely.
So it's crazy how
changing
things
of the
come
guard,
around.
if you
Oh
will.
my
Yeah,
gosh. I mean, I got friends that I went to high school with. I mean, the thing is, people talk about, it seems like life goes by fast. Absolutely it does. I got friends that I went to high school with. Their kids are now having kids themselves that are getting ready to graduate from school. And it just blows my mind. And especially since I've got a 15-year-old that's still got a couple of years left.
Right.
I'm like, man, I started late, but hey, that's a whole nother story. So what about some stories that you have been involved in or that you've heard about that might help somebody out?
Is it general topic or as it relates to CPL? So
General both, either one.
yeah, well, maybe more specifically on the CPL things, and I think it just goes back to the evolution of law enforcement's acceptance of, you know, those that choose to carry guns, either open carry or with a CPL, and we just have to get more exposed to it, I guess, and that took some time. So, you know, there was cases, I believe, locally here where there was an individual walking down a sidewalk that, you know, eventually was confronted by police because it was called in as a person with a gun. And that goes back to that perspective. And when law enforcement gets a 911 call, if there's somebody near a school with a gun or something like that, I mean, we have to go. We have to investigate that because we don't know.
That was right over here on Michigan, wasn't it? I think, wasn't he
Yeah, I'm
walking?
not sure
He was
exactly
walking
where it was,
up and down the sidewalk with an AR on his shoulder.
Yeah, I don't know exact details, but I know it obviously made some media attention, and there was some questions to the legality and things like that. And that's just that double-edged sword, unfortunately, that our communities have to deal with when someone gets called in with a gun. Now, whether they're completely legal and have no ill will, we have to process that as, you know, as it's coming in, and potentially there may be harm to someone until we establish that there's not. And,
Sure.
And so those kind of stories are, you know, they're getting fewer, which is good because I think we're getting a better understanding, you know, from both perspectives. But again, it's, you know, when someone calls 911 and says someone's got a gun and they're, you know, in this location near a certain school or something like that, the police have to go. I mean, they just absolutely have to go. So,
well, that's like my students. I tell them, you know, carrying a gun concealed or whatever can get cumbersome at times. I mean, you carrying a duty belt and everything like that, I can't imagine what that would be like. But just carrying a firearm on my side over time, it can get cumbersome and old. Sure. You know, and I tell my students, the last thing, you know, if that happens, don't just take it and sit in the seat beside you. You know, secure it correctly. Put it in your trunk. You know, secure it. One, if you're in a wreck, you don't want a loaded firearm bouncing around inside your car.
That could be dangerous,
not only that, but it's never going to fail. You're going to drive up the road and somebody's going to look over and see in your car, and you're going to see a gun in the front seat. And next thing you know, you got the lights behind you
their
because they pulled it
perspective
in.
is such that it could be dangerous, and the 911 calls come in. Sure, absolutely.
Now, let me ask you this, Tom. What's your thought on dispatch momentum, being the first to call law enforcement if you're in a situation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, safety is the number one priority. If you're in the you know, very core of a bad situation, protect yourself and your family as best you can first. When you get to a point of safety, you know, obviously being a 911 caller can definitely help. You know, especially someone who's gone through some training like the CPL classes. I think they get a little better insight to, you know, maybe what a dispatcher might need because they start thinking differently than some people that are not trained. There's a place to call 911. There's a place to help yourself, obviously. So first of all, protect yourself and those that are with you. And then when you can safely, and then of course, when you make that contact, to let them know, especially if you are carrying, you know, that you're on scene and you're a CPL holder and maybe what your physical description is so they understand who they're talking to. There was a horrible case. I'm just starting to follow it out on the West Coast of the United States where an off-duty officer confronted someone at his home. And unfortunately, some of the misinformation was the off-duty officer was described as a suspect, and the law enforcement that responded, they actually shot him, the off-duty officer. So it's a very horrible situation, again, just based on misinformation and misperception. So
sure, and I get that because like Michigan Stand Your Ground, you're able to put yourself into another person's shoes. I tell people you need to be very cautious when you do that for the fact, especially if you walk in some place and three people have their firearm pulled, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy?
Yeah.
Who you might have an off-duty law enforcement that has their gun and has their firearm pulled.
Absolutely.
So, you know, something you may want to think about is there's always, again, for every action, there's going to be a reaction. So we just need to try to think before we react.
Absolutely.
So that's all I have for tonight. Anything you want to add, Tom? Please feel free.
Just stay safe out there. And, you know, there's some crazy things going on in the world right now. And, you know, think before you, like you said, think before you go.
Okay. Fantastic. I want to thank you, Tom. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's been our pleasure, been our honor. So, guys, I want to tell you guys, stay safe. God bless. Take care of each other. Watch over each other. It's going to be a crazy world out there, and we need to be vigilant. So, with that being said, have a good night, guys.